Omar, thanks for coming to the show. But before we get started, can you please introduce yourself to my viewers?
Sure. Thanks, Raj, for having me. Super excited to be here. My name is Omar Halabieh. I'm a technology executive. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years. I'm currently Director of Technology for Amazon Payment Services, so basically Amazon's payments technology arm in the Middle East and Africa region. I've been with Amazon for almost 10 years now. Prior to that, I worked in tech, but in the energy industry, and my background is in computer science. Sort of inside and outside of my day-to-day role, I'm super passionate about helping others kind of unleash their leadership potential and accelerate their career growth. And looking forward to our conversation today.
Seems like you have a great experience, which will be amazing for my viewers to listen to. Okay, so question number one, Omar. Since most of my viewers are individual contributors and you manage a large team of individual contributors, what skills should these individual contributors, such as solutions architect as myself, have?
In that respect, since ICs are generally viewed as specialists, obviously the technical chops behind what they're doing is in some sense table stakes, so I won't cover that. But I think there's a few characteristics or skill sets that I believe sets ICs apart, especially as you get into more and more senior IC roles. I think the first one is really an ability to lean in with your curiosity and deeply listen, whether listening to understand the problem space or what customers' inputs are providing you, to really make sure that you have a good understanding of the challenges, risks, opportunities, etc. So I feel like listening is such an important skill. And it doesn't come natural because as solutionists, we tend to, in some sense, just jump in and try to provide solutions. But I think it's super important to sit back and sort of listen. I think with that also, I feel comes the other side of the coin, which is asking really good questions. I think asking good questions, particularly in these types of role, is a superpower that helps you uncover insights, things that are not said but could be very valuable. It could be risks that you're helping uncover. It could be opportunities that you're unfolding that maybe even the client isn't aware that they exist. I feel is maybe the second. And maybe a third one that I would highlight is the ability to really build trust. I feel is particularly important. We as technologists are, I like to call like agents of change. You're
Right.
typically changing the way things either operated or were functioning or whatever else. But to be able to do that, you really need to, in some sense, build that trust. And I think it comes down to fundamentals such as like respecting what came before, and really actively working to, through listening and asking questions, really building that trust and that relationship so that the other party sees that, their interests and your interests are aligned, and they essentially come with you on that transformation journey. So I feel like if I had to pick maybe three things, those three kind of come top of mind for me, Raj.
So if I have to summarize, so of course you have to have the technical chops. You also have to have the ability to navigate ambiguous situations. You get big, hairy projects. You must be able to navigate through that by asking right questions, diving deeper than the surface, and also ability to think big, to have the vision. And maybe sometimes customers won't exactly know or even say what the project should do 2 years down the line, but as a good IC, you should have that thought process that you can see the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of round it out is like, how do you bring people alongside with you on that journey?
Mm-hmm.
Because you may have that clarity of vision in terms of where you want to take this and what the potential is, but you have to also make it so that others also see that and come
Right.
along for the journey. And I think that part is also important. Yeah.
Omar, you have definitely mastered the networking. You have a large following in social media, and I keep hearing this thing that grow your network, grow your network. But how can someone meaningfully grow their network, Omar?
Sure. So a couple of things that help, Raj. I think first of all, in some sense, making, building your network and building your relationship part of your day to day, I think is important. Typically, we think of networking as like maybe a separate activity and maybe one that we reserve for times when we're either looking to get something or maybe looking for a new role or something like that. So I think first of all, like making it as part of your day to day, I feel becomes important. And knowing that, networks in both directions, whether you're giving value or getting value from others, I think is essentially something that you build over time. You may not exactly know how and where and why it'll pay dividends in the future, but you kind of lean in and say that, hey, this is an important part of what you do. So I think prioritizing that, I think, becomes important. The way I like to think of it is like being intentional about what network you're building, why you're building it. I think is important, and maybe thinking of it. I like to think of it as like almost like a concentric circle model, right? Where your first degree circle are people that basically say even within your company or maybe outside of your company, like these are people that you interact with on a regular basis. There's a lot of dependency between what you're doing and maybe what they're doing, etc. And those are relationships that you want to actively and very regularly invest in building there, whether through work meetings, meetings outside, etc., and so on and so forth. In terms of your second degree, maybe you engage with them every now and then, maybe even if you touch base like every month or every quarter or whatever else, it's good enough. And this model really helps you also prioritize your time because it's easy also to get overwhelmed by thinking like I have to network with everybody and anybody all actively, which I think this model kind of helps you prioritize and that relationship. I think as you approach these situations, a few things at least that help me. I think number one is always sort of approach these conversations leaning on your curiosity in terms of what can I learn. I feel is a great way to build connection and do that. I think the second point is maybe approaching it with a mindset of trying to add value. So like, what can I provide the other person? And we generally maybe sell ourselves short with respect to, we think at times like we have nothing to offer. I would challenge you to say like, there's always something you can offer to the other person in that respect. So maybe challenging yourself there. I think being respectful of others' time and also being truthful. I think people have very high sort of bull detectors. So like if you're not approaching it with the right intention or whatever else, like people see right through that. So I think being truthful is important. And lean on compounding. Like this doesn't happen overnight. So do a little bit, build that habit, do it regularly, and then the effects will compound over time. Like these networks that you've developed, I've developed, it hasn't happened overnight, but little by little over time this has happened. And lastly, I would say for most of us, maybe especially in tech, I find there's like more maybe an introvert tendency. This doesn't come naturally. So I think
Right.
admitting that and saying like, hey, this doesn't come naturally to me, but it's important. So I'm going to put in the effort to make it happen. And at times it may help to just set some goals for yourself to say, hey, you know what, like every week or two, I do want to meet maybe one or two people new. And that goal just helps you keep it top of mind. Again, the number itself, I don't think is like dictated in that respect, but I think it helps you kind of get there.
Also, like I think one thing that have been helpful for me is in the beginning, I would feel intimidated by reaching out to folks who are like one level or two level above me. So you can always start with people who are at the same level as you or even lower, because remember, time will pass and all the juniors that you are interacting now, they will become senior with you. So carrying forward that network also helps a lot and also gives you an easy way to get started, right? Like it might be a little intimidating for someone to ping someone like Omar, right, who is a director at Amazon. So you can start with your level or even a level below and start building network that way. Next question, Omar. This is something that I suffer from: tactical thinking versus strategic thinking. Anytime there is like an issue or like a particular specific area, I just narrow in and I just go to the rabbit hole of thinking tactically, and I lose the sight of the big strategic picture. But you have been in Amazon for 10 years, a red badger, and you are a director, so you do think big all the time. So, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can give Omar to switch this tactical thinking to strategic thinking?
Sure. I think one thing I'll start off with, Raj, is I almost see them as like two very sort of synergistic and integrated components, because I think that strategic thinking, sort of devoid of any, let's say, execution and tactic and really understanding of the underpinnings, in my mind, turns out to be like almost like a shallow hull. And so for me, I think both are important. I think the way I look at least strategic thinking, I think of it, Raj, as more of an output. And there's a lot of underpinning inputs that help you then drive strategic thinking. So I think some of those components that go in as inputs are things like, what's the company's strategy? What are the goals? What are the objectives that the organization as a whole, whether it's your unit, the next level, or the company as a whole, what are they trying to achieve? What markets are they trying to go after? What products do we have? Who are our competitors, etc. Is important. What are some of another input, like what are some of the current trends that are happening? What are some of the challenges or the opportunities that either our business is facing, the industry is facing? Maybe what are some of the disruptive forces that are coming in? What are some regulations potentially that could be on the horizon? So I think these inputs really help you then formulate your thinking and align them with the strategy. And you may ask, like, hey, how do I get a hold of these things? Well, I think reviewing your team level, your org level goals, whether through formal mechanisms of goal setting, whether in things like town hall or team meetings, help. You can even at the company level, like things like shareholder letters could be in. You can follow thought leaders online on your favorite social platform. You can ask questions, like ask your manager, ask your skip level, what their priorities are, what keeps them up at night, etc. And this way, that as you're going about your day-to-day work, you always have that ability now to link between, like, what is it that I'm working on, and really how is it playing a role in advancing the bigger, broader business strategy there. And this really allows you then to, for example, propose new opportunities. So you may see opportunities that perhaps haven't yet landed on your table of responsibilities, but maybe are out there, and you're able to propose them. It allows you to also scale your work. So you may identify that, hey, I'm doing this piece of work here, but because I understand the strategy, maybe we can take it and apply it maybe in another product or another geography, because that's where the, let's say, the organizational priority or the goal is. I feel like one of the most important parts as we do this, and as it relates to strategic thinking, is how do you expose your thought process, and how do you articulate it, whether in presentations, in meetings, in documents, whatever it is, the medium of communication that you're using, and really anchor on just beyond the immediate benefits that you're bringing in. So you may say, like, I launched X and here's the result. But what would be even more interesting is I launched X, which then enables us to go chase Y or do Z or whatever else that may be. And so how do you bring that communication to the right altitude? I think matters. And then how do you make that connection obvious and make it so that people understand that that's the way that you think, and this is not like some part of like some haphazard thing that you went across. It's a very meticulous thought process that you're following. So those are, I feel like, the ingredients, and maybe the process at least that I go through in terms of how do I connect the two things together. But again, I would state that they're very ingrained into each other in that respect, and both are important for success.
So let's say a customer comes and says, hey, we want to develop this feature, Raj, can you help us architect it, right? So what you are saying is I should think about the customer's end goal and work backwards from it and try to understand their company direction, and maybe like say, hey, instead of investing in this feature, we could enhance this by adding this and this because I feel like that will add more value than this can provide. Is this how you grow broader and broader thinking?
Totally, totally. And maybe it's also that now that you have that forward view, it's like you can say, hey, we can do this as a step one, and then this enables us then to do step two and three and four, and this will help you get to the end goal that you have. And I think an important element that you just raised indirectly is like the importance of really asking the right question and listening, going back to the first topic that we covered, to be able to uncover some of these things if they're not obvious to you, instead of just taking things at face value.
Excellent, love it. I'm gonna practice it, Omar, to sharpen my strategic thinking. Okay, so this is 2024, Omar, and no conversation goes without mentioning Gen AI. So how can someone approach learning Gen AI to enhance their career?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, I think, we used to say that no day goes by without hearing about Gen AI. I think now it's come down to like no few minutes pass by uh, until you hear about Gen AI. I feel there's a few things that I think that are helpful there. I think first and foremost, I'm a big believer in learning fundamentals, especially when it comes to technology. It's easy to get caught up in sort of the top layer and the fat of like the applications and whatnot. But really, I think you'll be very well served to go in and understand the fundamentals. So, for example, what are LLM models? How do they work? How do you train them, etc. And this allows you not only to really understand what's below the hood, but it also allows you to more easily navigate across the different technology stacks that exist in terms of choices, but also across the stack in terms of like from infrastructure to the models to the applications, etc. So I think spending time to learn the fundamentals, I think, are very important. And fortunately, like this is a space now that there's tons of resources on. A lot of those resources are even free,
Right.
whether to the public, and then of course, if you're working as part of a company, your company may have tons of internal resources as well, or access to online resources or courses that are out there. So I think taking advantage of those and really leaning on the curiosity and going and chasing it and going beyond sort of the fad or what you hear buzzwords, but really understand the fundamentals there. And if you're a team leader or a manager or whatever your title is like I feel like this is an area you also need to lead by example. I think as your team sees that you're picking up interest, you're learning, that sends also the right signal to your team, to your organization, etc. There. And then look for opportunities to where, I mean, as with any technology, there's no better way to learn than to practice. And I feel that there's numerous ways to do that, both on the personal side, like dabbling with some of the models in terms of like producing content or editing content or whatever it may be. I think are
Right.
all part of learning and understanding how these things work. But then also as part of your day-to-day work, even if it's not involved in your day-to-day job just yet, but there's usually opportunities in the organization, whether folks are running hackathons or courses or anything like that, where you can go and do that. And also proposing ideas. I think there's a lot of like kind of bottoms-up innovation that's happening across, you know, companies everywhere, whether small, medium, large companies, where people are just getting together and hacking like, hey, what does it look like? And I think that the fact that the tools, I think, have gotten to a point where a lot of this has been democratized in terms of access to some of these things that make it so that even with not a lot of resources, at least you can get started and take it from there. So those kind of are the things that I would look at. But certainly, I think it's a topic that everyone should be, working in some capacity, because I feel like this is going to be an important trend that's now and here and now, and will be even more relevant as we move forward.
Excellent. So I have to ask you, like, what's your favorite Gen AI model that you like?
I think that my answer changes by the week, I think, as new models get released. And
Yeah.
so I've subscribed to most of them and then use
Yeah.
them, use them in different ways. And it's
Got it.
always interesting to continue to test them as new versions come out. And what you'll notice is that, again, in certain applications, certain models tend to behave better than others, whether, for example, text, image,
Right.
etc. So super exciting space, though. I take both a professional but also a personal passion towards it.
ICs have a lot of ideas, right?
Yeah,
And we all want our ideas to be implemented. So, how can a solutions architect influence the leadership on his or her ideas?
sure. I think first of all, I think reframing influence helps. I always used to think like influence is all about me sort of pushing my ideas to others in terms of like forcefully there. I think what I've learned is like, hey, how do you reframe that to be like you want people to pull the idea as opposed to you kind of pushing it down. I think the first step towards that I feel is really making sure that you're able to help others really understand the problem or the opportunity at hand. It's very easy for us technologists to again jump into the solution part
Right.
and say like, hey, this is a solution, this is why we should do it, etc. But if people really haven't gotten hooked on the problem or the opportunity that you're solving for and why it's important, the rest doesn't register or doesn't register in the way that you want it to. So make sure that you're able to crisply articulate like what is the problem we're solving, what's the opportunity we're pursuing, why is it important. So make sure that like there's a good understanding there before you jump into solutioning. Because what I find is like even if people, for example, are not on board with your specific recommended solution, but if they understand the problem, then it's a matter of time before you and them work out some other maybe alternate solution that can move you forward. But like, getting formulated sort of around that problem space, I feel is more than half the battle. So make sure that it's clear. Again, it may be crystal clear in your head, but make sure that for other stakeholders it is crystal clear. So that education bit at the beginning, I think, is super important. I think another aspect of this that becomes very important is obviously knowing your audience and then being able to frame your proposal in a way that both appeals and resonates with them, whether in terms of the language you're using, the metrics that you're using, the goals that the audience cares about or is tracking, etc. So if you're talking about you're talking to a CFO and you're trying to convince them, obviously having your business metrics and your financial metrics in order and being able to articulate those clearly is important. So that comes in. I feel like one area or maybe approach that's not leveraged enough is like doing these what I would call like smaller reviews with smaller pockets of people to really go deeper into understanding like what's their position, what are their goals, approach it with an open mind to learn. I think in these smaller forums, people tend to be more open, more willing to share, etc., and then assimilate all of that and then go for the big review versus trying to influence like so many people in one review with everyone being there becomes it becomes difficult to do that if you haven't done that smaller work. And part of that is as you're doing these smaller reviews, you'll typically encounter people that I would call like allies or maybe early adopters or whatever, enthusiasts that jump onto the idea maybe bigger, faster than others do. And this helps you uncover them and then leverage them to help drive and influence across the rest of the organization. So these are some tips, at least that I've used, Raj. And I think again, it's really about how do you help others understand. And typically, if people understand, again, like it drives the conversation in the right direction. Yeah.
The next question, Omar, being good is not enough. You have to prove you are good.
Sure.
Like the first point of interaction from your hiring manager or recruiter to you is LinkedIn profile, right?
Yeah.
Same way inside your manager needs to know that you are doing impactful work. So
Yeah.
how can ICs such as myself and other solutions architects can make their work visible?
Sure. I mean, that's a very like one of the topics that I get asked about very often because I think it's a challenge particularly because there's really a very fine line I feel between making your work visible and it sort of coming across as either like
Right.
bragging or showing off or whatever else.
Right.
And I think particularly again for people perhaps with introverted tendency, this is like extremely painful to a point
Yeah.
there. I think a few things that have helped me sort of through my journey in terms of making my work visible. I think the first one is reviewing work in progress. And really the intent here is, first of all, to improve the quality of your work, of your thinking, whether, for example, you're a solution architect and you're going to review perhaps with a more experienced peer or maybe somebody who has more experience at least in the area
Yeah.
that you're working in. But I think a nice side effect of doing these reviews of work in progress is now people know what you're working on. And a lot of these conversations end up, maybe even if it's not on the spot, but maybe a few weeks later or a few months later, somebody directs, like that principal engineer who reviewed your solution, directs somebody who may be working on something that can benefit from the work that you've done. So it's a great way to, as a side effect, also make your work visible. So get your work reviewed often and frequently at whatever checkpoints make sense. I think is one there. I think the second one is as you're working on things, I think give credit to others is also a great way to make even your own efforts visible. So, for example, if you've worked on something together with another team, at the end you can send a note and say, "Hey, thanks for helping us organize this Gen AI hackathon that happened, and as a result, these outcomes have happened." And then people also know that, hey, obviously you were part of that, so in some sense you get some tailwind from that by also lifting others in the process. The third one I feel is focusing on the impact, and when
Mm-hmm.
people see the impact, they also understand like, hey, there's people behind it, and those people in some sense also indirectly get credit. So whether it's things when you send out like launch announcements saying like, hey, here's a feature that was launched and here's the business impact it's having, or doing things like business reviews or whatever reviews that may be there. And then I would say and leverage your one-on-one interactions that you have. And as you're discussing with these leaders or peers or whatever else, and listening to what they're saying, you may find points where it's natural for you to insert things that you've done. So, for example, they may be talking about they're looking to reduce the operational cost of some area that they're working on, and you may have worked on like your latest Gen AI chatbot, and you may say,
Right.
"Hey, by the way, I worked on this. Maybe it's helpful, etc." But always from an approach again of helping, of being of service, but indirectly you're making your work visible. And then lastly, I would say, if either leverage forums that exist or create forums where things are shared. So, typically organizations may have demos or any kind of ceremony where things are being or a showcase or whatever else. Participate in those, and if those forums don't exist, maybe volunteer to hold them. I think they're a
Mm.
great way to show work. But again, I'll close with always like intent matters. So always approach these situations with a clear intent to sort of learn, to grow, to support others and deliver value. And you'll find that this value does come back to you. But you need to be intentional about doing this.
I love it, Omar. Your answers always have like implement ready tips, right? I think the viewers will find that very helpful. So, Omar, you have been in management for a long time, and I'm not sure if you started as an IC, but a lot of ICs, the career trajectory is they start as IC and then they go to management. So, if someone wants to transition from IC to management, how do they go about it?
No, and I can talk about that firsthand because I went from IC to manager. Then at some point I went to IC, back to IC, then
Mm,
switched back to manager. So I've been through that transition at least myself a few times, and then
right.
have helped many others also through it. Um, I I think the first thing I'll start out by saying, Raj, is I think it's important to first start out by inspecting your motives. And I say that in a good meaningful way in terms of really digging in terms of like why do you want to become a manager? And you want to make sure that you're going into it with the right reasons, with the right intentions. It's easy to get sort of lured in, I feel, especially with management, thinking like, hey, I could tell people what to do. Or
Right.
maybe in some cases, depending on the company and the reward structure, maybe it's more rewarding to be a manager, maybe not.
Right.
Which I'm not saying these things aren't important or that they don't happen. They do. But I think it's important to make sure that you check in with your intent because for you to be satisfied long term in your career, be fulfilled, but also be successful, I feel like you have to genuinely like the type of role that you're doing. And clearly with
Right.
IC and manager, there is a difference in terms of like as a manager, it's really about delivering through others, really helping others grow. Not to say that ICs also don't help in that respect, but I feel
Mhm.
the proportions in terms of how much time you spend in each there. I feel like to get started, if you say, "Hey, this is something I'm interested in," I think there's a lot of ways to lead and exercise sort of the leadership skills needed to be a successful manager without necessarily having the title. So I remember a few instances in my career where just step into what I would call like the white spaces in the projects that you're doing. It may be, stepping in to, negotiate with a vendor about a certain deliverable that you need for the particular project that you're working
Mm.
on, or maybe you have a new team member that has joined and they need help onboarding and ramping up and whatnot. So you don't have to have the title to start exercising some of these things, but they do give you a flavor of what does that look like and am I actually enjoying doing it? Do I want to be doing it, etc. And assuming that, hey, you're finding these things, appealing to you, perhaps you're even getting good feedback that you're doing them well. I think having that open, honest conversation with your manager would be the next step to really share your ambition, but also be patient to say, hey, like I know this may take some time, both for the organization perhaps to find the role or whatever else, but also for me to develop that skill set. But make sure that they know about that and work with them on some plan to help you step by step take this transition. Ideally, the best case scenario is that you can do that within the existing space that you're in, because this offers a low risk way to
Right.
test it out. Because there, like you're familiar with the technology, with stakeholders, with what the team does. So the only difference is like IC versus manager. Whereas if you're trying to go to a new space, not to say it's not doable, it just makes it harder because now you're ramping up on multiple dimensions and it can be overwhelming, particularly because I'm subscribed to the book title like what got you here won't get you there. It's a
Mhm.
different type of skill sets that's required to be successful as a manager. You lean on obviously some of the strength that you learned as an IC, but there are distinct differences. So getting mentors and also leveraging your manager through that period, I think becomes important. The last thing I'll say is that similar to what I started with is a lot of times like we do think of these decisions in the Amazonian sense of like one-way door, which is like if I switch from an IC to a manager, like I'm committed to that path for the rest of my life.
Mm.
Yes, it's not a decision you should take lightly, but at the same time, like again, don't think of it as a one-way door. This is a decision that you can, work through for a while, and then if you decide this is not the thing for you, there's always a way to sort of change direction again. So if you think this is something that you want to try and there's that itch and you want to get that sort of certainty around whether this is something you want to do, try it out. And if it doesn't work out, then you can go back to an IC. As I mentioned, I've done that at least multiple times in my career. And yeah, so I think that just helps also make it so that it's not as much of a perhaps a big deal as we sometimes think it is. But again, approach it with this. I think these tips can help you think through it.
The biggest takeaway for me is it's not a one-way door; it's a two-way door. So everyone should try it out if they want to, and then they can get back if they are not liking the other side of the door. Omar, this ends the formal questionnaires, but in my channel, we always end the interview with some rapid fire questions, and the guests don't know what questions are coming, so we try to make it fun. All right, Omar, favorite Amazon leadership principle?
Hire and develop the best.
Okay. What do you prefer as a hiring manager, LinkedIn profile or a Word doc resume?
I would still go with a Word doc resume.
Okay. PC or Mac?
Mac.
Okay. Favorite music band?
Uh, I like Metallica.
Metallica, all right. Dream vacation?
I would say Turkey.
Turkey, okay, I've never been. I need to go there. Kindle or paperback?
I used to be exclusive hardcore paperback, and about maybe a year and a half ago, I switched to Kindle and have never looked since. All these
All
books
right.
that you see in the background are older than that.
Fair, fair. If you can have dinner with any person, dead or alive, who will that be?
Oh, tough question. Um, I would say for me, maybe I'll pick Daniel Kahneman, the Think Fast, Think Slow. I think I'm a big fan of his work on thinking, and so maybe that's who I'll pick. Yeah.
Got it. And what kind of restaurant will you take Daniel to?
Uh, I mean, I'm biased towards Lebanese food because that's where I grew up, so I'll take that.
Lebanese? Okay. All right. Thank you, Omar. So, how can viewers connect with you?
Sure, I'd say LinkedIn is the best medium. Just search my name. I post daily on leadership and career, so just either follow me, connect with me, send me a message. Happy to connect.
Excellent. Thank you, Omar, for stopping by this show and chatting with my viewers.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me, Raj. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to speaking again.